everyone, welcome to our first webinar in the series of 4 for Get the Most Out of Your Patch, and this is part of our Sustainable Garden Awards 2020. Before we begin, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Kaurna people, and we want to pay our respects to their elders past and present. Today we're here at the Physio Clinic Marryatville, and we're here with Angela. So gardening is a favourite pastime of many people. It keeps us active and healthy in our activities in every day, but we want to avoid injury. So Angela here today is going to help us learn how to avoid injury while we're gardening. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you for that, Naomi. So gardening can be a common cause of many musculoskeletal injuries. So the purpose of today's presentation is to talk about the most common injuries and how we can go about avoiding them so we can keep you in the garden for much longer and healthier. So we'll just switch to the slides when we're ready and then we'll get started. All right, so you might ask, how can simple hobby gardening lead you to injury? Well, it's normally between two main mechanisms. So the first is repetitive tasks, and the second one is sustained postures. So that might be things such as sitting, kneeling, or remaining in a bent over position for prolonged periods of time. Now, both of these can be enough to put a lot of stress on any joint throughout the body. Now, the most common gardening injuries are neck ache, rotator cuff tendinopathy, elbow tendinopathy, or commonly referred to tennis elbow or golfer's elbow, carpal tunnel syndrome, lower backache, knee joint pain, and prepatellar bursitis. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with a few of these, but to elaborate on a couple which you may not know as much about, rotator cuff tendinopathy are the small muscles that are deep within the shoulder. Now, the tendon attaches the muscle to the bone, and with repetitive tasks, occasionally that tendon can become inflamed. Similar to elbow tendinopathy, the same mechanism, and it's various tendons around the elbow, which again can be the tennis or the golfer's elbow, which you might have heard of before. Carpal tunnel syndrome is when the nerves that enters and supplies the hand becomes compressed under the fibrous band of tissue along the wrist and can give you pain, pins and needles, or numbness within the hand and wrist. Then lastly, we have patellar bursitis. Now you've got a little fluid-filled sac at the front of the knee. Now sometimes with increased compression, so for example kneeling, that bursa might inflame and then can be a source of pain. All right, so we're going to go through the most common gardening mistakes and then how to correct them. So the first one is starting cold and stiff. Warming up and stretching before and after exercise have been proven to reduce the risk of injury. So for that reason, it's really important to do a warm-up and then a cool-down after exercise, and in this case, gardening. Now, when it comes to stretching, there's two different types. There's dynamic and then there's static. The dynamic warms the body and prepares it for the repetitive movements that you're going to demand of it during your gardening session. And then that's versus static, which is useful to improve overall flexibility and is most effective after you've finished gardening, so as a cool down, for example. Now, a typical warm-up should take at least 10 minutes and will involve light aerobic movements and some dynamic stretching that mimics the movements of the activity that you're about to perform. This process is designed to raise your heart rate and increase the blood flow to your muscles, therefore warming them up. Now, with this increased blood flow, you get more oxygen and energy that's delivered to the muscle, so you're a bit more efficient in completing your task. The warm-up also activates the nerve signals to your muscles, which results in faster reaction speeds. Now, there are a few rules for both dynamic and static stretching. For dynamic stretching, you want to make sure that the body is warm and then not letting it cool down before you start your task. You want to move your body through your range of movement, keeping control of the movement so you're not flinging or throwing body parts around. It should never be painful, so it should feel like a light discomfort at best, but never beyond a 3 out of 10 pain. So it's more of a stretch than a pain felt within a joint, for example. Now, the idea is you'll start with a small, slow, low intensity movement and gradually progress to full speed movements through range. Now with each, you might want to complete each repetition about 10 to 15 times for an adequate warm-up. Now, during your warm-up, it's a good idea to potentially go for a couple of laps around your garden while you're assessing and planning your gardening day, and then follow that by a couple of dynamic stretches, which we'll go through together in a practical component in a moment. Now, after you've finished your gardening, you'll want to go through the static stretching. So this is your cool down. Now, the rules for static stretching are making sure that you're stretching while your muscles are still warm. So don't wait an hour later before you do all your stretching. It's best to do, a short period after. Now, you slowly want to take your muscles to the end of their range. Again, you should feel slight resistance within the muscle, but you shouldn't feel pain within a joint, and it shouldn't be necessarily painful. So the same rules abide of, no more than a 3 out of 10 discomfort. With static stretching opposed to dynamic, here you want to hold in one position for about 20 to 30 seconds, making sure that you're not bouncing your joints back and forth. You're just taking it to the end of their range at a comfortable level and then holding. So we're going to go through a quick stretching session of what a warm-up and a cool down might look like. So we will switch to camera, if that's all right. Lovely. So you're going to start as a warm-up, this is the dynamic stretches, with a few neck circles. Now keep it pain-free, so if you've got a bit of a niggle somewhere, then potentially adapt, and you might not go through the whole range, just go somewhere that's comfortable. So you're going to do that both ways. And of course, as I mentioned, you do about 10 to 15 repetitions at each body joint. We're just going to do a couple just to get a bit of an idea and a flow through. So after your circles, you might want to go to a light stretch either side of the neck. And then we're going to warm up the shoulders and do some swings across body. And then get shoulders moving the opposite way, so in circles. And don't forget to go both ways. Then we're going to get the wrists involved and circles with wrist and fingers. So one way and then the other. Next to the middle, warm up the lower back, a few circles one way and then of course the other. Might want to add in a little bit of an extension as well, just to a gentle range again. And then we're going to go into leg swings, forwards and back. Follow through with a mini lunge, just to get all the lower limb muscles working and ready for the exercise you're about to undertake in the garden. Good. So that's an example of a dynamic warm-up, so before you start gardening. And then the next part is going to be after you've finished. So these are the static stretches. So here you might want to start going from the head to the tail again with a side stretch. Now head neck to the side, and you can apply a little bit of overpressure if you like, and you should feel the stretch through the side of the neck coming to the shoulder blade there. So you'll hold these stretches for about 10 to 20 seconds, or sorry, 20 to 30 or so actually for each. We're just going to do them quickly today. Make sure you don't forget both sides as well. Good. Now from there, we're going to move to the shoulder. So across body, and you should feel this stretch through the back of that shoulder blade and arm through there. Good. And then we're going to move to the wrist. So wrist backwards and then forwards. And then moving to the lower back again. Now with the lower back here, you don't have to hold for 20 seconds. I find in my experience, backs tolerate a little bit more of a movement, whereas the other stretches, you'll hold there for 20, 30. This one, you can keep moving. So this one's a bit of an exception to the rest of the rules. Then from there, you might want to move into the quadriceps, which is the front thigh muscle. and holding that here. If you need to hold on to something to balance, do so to get the best out of your stretch. With your quad stretch, make sure your knees are in line and you're not forwards like this. So you want to be knees close together, and then you can even push into that backhand a little bit just to increase it. Lovely. And then next we've got the hamstring stretch. So if you pop your foot up on a small box, stick your bottom out backwards, and then feel the stretch at the back of the thigh through here. Make sure you've got a straight back when you do this. You want to poke your bum out a little bit further, and then keep that knee bent just a touch, and that should really ignite the hamstrings. All right, good. Now from there, you can even take it into a hip flexor stretch as well, which, just want to tilt the camera down a little bit. Thank you. So in that lunge position, and then you're going to lean forwards. So just to show you on the other side, might be a little clearer. Leaning forwards is going to open up the hip flexor through here. So that's where this stretch should be felt. Good. And then we're going to move into lastly to finish with just a calf stretch. So again, in that steady lunge position, your back heel stays on the floor. So we're stretching the calf, which is the back of the lower leg through here. And then just holding that again for 20-30 seconds. Now you can do calf stretch a couple of different ways. So that's one. Otherwise you can pop a foot up to a wall and then lean in. First of all, straight leg or bent knee. There's two main muscle bolts that build up the calf here. One crosses the knee joint and the other doesn't. So it might be worthwhile trying both stretches so you find that one's going to be tighter than the other. So you can continue with those. Now we'll just get back to the slides and we'll keep going. All right, the second most common mistake is staying in one sustained position or on one task for too long. So the solution to this is frequent breaks and alternate in between tasks. So for example, this might look like one light task such as weeding for about 20 minutes and then switch to a heavier task like digging for another 20. It's important to acknowledge that you may be using muscle groups and joints that haven't been exercising quite some time. So switching between and alternating is going to give some muscles time off while others are working. So you're switching between. As a general rule of thumb, try to aim for 3 different tasks for each hour. So think about alternating different body groups, as I mentioned as well. So this might look like switching between overhead pruning, and then you might go to a kneeling position for 20 minutes. And then you might go to a more labour-intensive digging exercise for the other 20, and that will make up the 3 within an hour. All right, number 3, adopting bad postures. So the solution to this is make sure that you're aware of maintaining a good posture all throughout the day in every activity and every position. So you want to maintain a neutral spine, which means that your back isn't too arched and it's not too rounded. You also want to make sure that you're remaining straight onto the task. So make sure that you're not in an awkward, twisted position for too long. So try and have anything you're doing straight directly in front of you. It also might be useful to utilize knee pads or stools to limit the time spent bending or kneeling. As you can see in the picture on the left, you've got a lovely little knee pad there. And then lastly, you could also consider using raised flower beds, and that limits the amount of time that you spend actually on the floor, especially important for people with lower back pain. All right, number 4, poor manual handling, and especially when you're lifting heavy items. So the solution to this is make sure you remember all your manual handling techniques. So again, neutral spine, which means not too much curve and not too much bend. So if you tilt your hips all the way one way in a curve and then all the way the other way in a bend, the middle of the two is where you find your neutral spine. Now, once you've found that, you want to make sure that you're nice and close to the load. So bring things as close to as possible. Avoid twisting and making sure you're lifting with your legs, not your back. So you do have to squat down through the knees rather than just bending over, keeping your knees straight. Now, when you go to lift up, lightly brace your lower tummy muscles and your glutes, which are your bottom muscles. And that's where all your force and energy are coming from, rather than it being absorbed in the lower back. again, especially important for all of those of you with lower back issues. Now, the reason for this is because your legs are the strongest when they're bent halfway. So if you squat too low, you're going to find lifting a heavy object more energy taxing and also potentially a little bit more uncomfortable, especially if you've got previous injuries. So whenever possible, try to have smaller, lighter loads. And when that's not possible, use wheelbarrows. So instead of carrying a big bag of fertiliser from one side of the garden to the other, make sure you're using things to make your life easier, even if it's only a short distance, because if you're repetitively doing that throughout the day, it will have a compounding effect. So make your life easier, not harder when you can. Right, and number 5, not choosing your equipment and plants carefully. So as you can see on the left, our mate in the red shirt hasn't really chosen his equipment all that thoughtfully. So a few little tips and tricks if you're not aware of them already, which you'll be able to find at, I'm sure, all your local Bunnings stores. Not that this is endorsed, but you look for tools with padded or ergonomic handles. So they reduce the discomfort in the hands and thumbs and wrists if they are molded to your hand, which if they've been designed that way ergonomically, they will fit just perfect. Also make sure you're using long handled tools to avoid having to be in that bent over position. So especially important when you're raking or sweeping around the garden. And then we get down to choosing our plants. So make sure you consider which plants you're purchasing if you're redoing your garden and that they match your physical capabilities. Often native plants require less watering and pruning, so it means you're not having to get into the garden as regularly, which may suit you and your lifestyle and your body a little bit better. Also consider how large a plant can grow, because obviously this is going to impact how often it needs to be pruned and the maintenance it requires. So being quite selective, and if you go to the local garden centre, I'm sure they're more than happy to help you out choosing one that's right for you. What would be right for me is a cactus, because they're really hard to kill, but hopefully you have more luck than I do. All right, now number 6, not listening to your body, taking breaks or asking for help. So pain and discomfort can often be your body's warning system that you've done too much, you've overdone it and bitten off more than you can chew. So make sure you're really in tune to your body and you're not doing too much too soon. So ideally, we want to start gradually and pace yourself by picking perhaps a smaller part of the garden and then slowly building up over time so your body's conditioned and it can have time to adapt to the task you're asking of it. So essentially, if you've got a big job to do, consider maybe doing it every second day and then making sure you're monitoring your symptoms, because you may not feel pain or discomfort during while everything's warm, you may feel after. So as a rule of thumb, if you aggravate something a little bit and get a bit of discomfort, if your symptoms go back down to baseline 24 hours after, that's a green light that you can proceed, and even err on the side of caution with a bit of an orange light of making sure that you're not doing too much the next time you get back in the garden. If you find you're a little bit more ginger, a little bit more stiff, then that's probably a good indication that your body's telling you that you've just overdone it a little bit much. So dial it down in either how much time you're spending in the garden or the tasks that you're doing. Now, another thing you consider could be a working bee. So share the tasks around, ask for help. It's a lovely thing to do to get maybe a couple of friends or neighbours over and help you prune the roses or whatever tasks you've got going on in the garden. And then maybe perhaps you can return the favour in a week or two. It's much more fun when you do things together as well, and makes it a bit more of a day out, isn't it? All right, now, help. I have an injury. I've ran into trouble in the garden. What do I do? So immediately you can try doing gentle, pain-free range of movement stretches. Now, none of these should be above a discomfort level of about 3 to 4 out of 10 pain. So just try to keep things moving, but within a pain-free range or a low pain tolerance. Now, you might also want to utilise heat or ice after a small niggle in the garden too. Now, we get a lot of questions of when to use each. So generally, you want to ice things if the injury is acute, red, hot, and swollen. So ice works by constricting the blood vessels, which means tightening so there's less blood flow to the area, which in turn reduces the inflammation to the area. Now, other chronic tension type issues might respond better to heat. So for example, we had a question about low back pain, and similarly neck pain. If it's not an acute injury, they normally respond a little better to heat because that soothes muscles, and now it promotes circulation by dilating or making the blood vessels bigger so things can relax, and that muscle tension will hopefully soothe away. Now, if you're ever unsure, make sure you book a consult with your physiotherapist because they can assess you, treat you, and provide you with a rehab program that's individualised and specialised exactly to you. So if you try these couple of tips and tricks of just keeping the body moving and either heat or ice, depending on what you've done, and you're still feeling like it's not really changed a whole lot after a day or two, then do book in and see a physiotherapist so you can get individualised expert advice. All right, so as a summary of what we've gone through today, making sure that we warm up and cool down, alternating between tasks and planning your day, adopt good posture always, so be constantly thinking about where your body is in space, adopt good manual handling techniques, consider your equipment and the plants that you're about to plant or purchase, and listen to your body and take regular breaks. Now, if you ever want to visit us here, this is our contact details and we'd love to meet you in clinic. But otherwise, hopefully you all stay fit and healthy and have a lovely time in your gardens. It's a good time of year for it being spring, so hopefully the roses are out. I know ours are out for sure.
That was amazing, thank you. I'm going to try some of those warm-ups this weekend in the garden and hopefully I avoid some injuries as well. Now, if you've got any questions, pop them in the comments section. We did have one about lower back pain, which I think you definitely covered throughout, so that was very useful. But we'll just hang around for a minute or so. If you've got a question, pop it in the comments section. Otherwise, this will be posted live afterwards and you're able to re-watch it on the City of Nord, Payneham and St. Peter's YouTube channel. Seems like we don't have any questions coming through, so we might end it there today. And thank you so much again for your time and putting that together. That was very helpful.
Thank you for having me.
See you later, everyone.